Hey everyone, massive welcome to the first in what is a brand new series here on InfoSec Live, the Human CISO, a unique series on the non-technical side of managing security, joined by Scott Wright, CEO and founder of ClickArmor, and myself, Simon Linstead, the host and founder of the InfoSec Live community. But before we begin the big event, a little bit of housekeeping. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy our content. And for those of you watching who are already subscribed, I'd like to say a massive thank you for helping us achieve the YouTube Partner Program status, which we did at the weekend. So we've had 4,000 hours watched now on this channel in the last 11 months. 2,000 of you have subscribed. And I just want to say a big thank you for that. It means the world to us. And please today, do jump in the chat. Let us know what you think. Any ideas for improvement are always welcomed as well. This is all about learning and sharing best ideas and practice. So for those that don't know a bit about the InfoSec Live community, we're an independent social network of now 3,200 cyber professionals, all sharing best ideas and practice in what I believe is the world's first dedicated security social network. We've been creating content now on YouTube for just under a year. And as I said, very excited to announce that we've just qualified for that YouTube Partner Program. And as always, our aim is to keep bringing you valuable and informative content. And the new series is here to help that by continuing the theme in our community of sharing those best ideas and practice. And no more waffling from Simon. It's time to bring on our guest for this awesome new series, Mr. Scott Wright, who's the founder and CEO of ClickArmor, a veteran cybersecurity consultant and coach with over 15 years of experience in helping CISOs manage the human side of IT security risks, specializing in bridging the gap between technical and non-technical teams to ensure better communication, collaboration, as well as better security culture. He's also the creator of the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum and has been a regular co-host on the Shared Security Show podcast since 2009. So without further ado, let's bring him on. Massive welcome, Scott.
Hey, Simon, it's great to be here. And congratulations on your YouTube channel partner program participation. That's awesome.
Do you know, thank you. I will be honest, though, it was only last week that I actually realized what that meant. And it was my 13-year-old son who had to tell me that. So,
well, that's the world we live in now, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. So look, thanks ever so much for taking the time to come on. We've spoken a few times now. I've had a little play around with your amazing training platform as well. And I've got to say, it is pretty awesome. And I know we're not here to do a pitch on that so much today, but I would really like you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and I suppose explain what we mean by the human CISO, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I really appreciate the opportunity to, put this program together with you and really welcome everybody that's here. Yeah, the human CISO is an interesting concept. We just sort of struck on this as we were talking a few weeks ago, really. And in my world, it's been something I've been passionate about for over 15 years, really. I'm actually an engineer by training, did software product management for a number of years. I did some security consulting with the federal government here in Canada. A lot of it was, large IT projects, risk management, IT architecture. And after a few years, I discovered there's a real issue that was bothering me. And that is, we have some great security technologies, great solutions, but it all comes down to whether or not those solutions are configured properly or used properly. And, it could be direct attacks on the employees. And at the time in, 2007, there wasn't a lot of phishing going on. There was no ransomware, and even then, though, I could tell that the attackers were, based on my risk assessment knowledge, the attackers are going to figure it out where the weakest link is, and it's the people. It's not always the training, and that is what I focus on now. There are a lot of other aspects to security programs that can have weaknesses that are creep in because of the human nature of of what we do. But we really tend to focus a lot on technology to the extent that we kind of get blind to some of the other aspects that we need to cover. One of the things I recall seeing recently in a conference was there's a gentleman by the name of Mark Adams, who's a very well-known risk management consultant working for Optiv. And at one of the conferences I was at with him, he said, we are way overspent on security technology. When you look at people, process, and technology, we spend almost nothing on the human side. And that really, kind of encapsulated what I was feeling. We're also in a situation, he said, where we are indefensible in some cases. If you get breached and you're taken to court, the fact that you've put everybody through training doesn't necessarily mean that you've done your due diligence. And so these are things that, I am constantly trying to help organizations understand where those risks are, how you can efficiently address them. And so over the last 10 years, I've been focused a lot on security awareness training. As I mentioned, I would do lunch and learns, brown bag sessions for anybody who would have me. And then I had my own sort of lightweight learning management system from about 2010 on, and I got great feedback from customers in terms of the level of technical knowledge that I was trying to convey to people. But I could tell people really weren't paying a lot of attention. And when you only did it once a year, they would forget it pretty fast, and there was almost no value in doing it other than for the compliance checkmark.
Yeah.
And I had customers saying, could we make this stuff more interesting, more fun? And so I did a lot of research on gamification and how it had been applied to learning and training. And I sort of got a realization 4 or 5 years ago that it really is important to distinguish between awareness training, like cybersecurity awareness training, and other kinds of training, including security training, that is career oriented, right? Because people who take training for their career or to learn a product, set of product features, how to use it, they know they need that for their job on a daily basis. Whereas everybody who has to take security awareness training, for the most part, would rather be doing something else. And it's the kind of training that nobody
Brutal
wants
truth,
to take.
isn't it, Scott? It's the brutal
It's the brutal truth. Yeah. And I like a challenge. So, so let's try and take on that one. Right.
No, absolutely.
But when I realized that awareness training was such a different beast, and that gamification has been really successful at not only engaging people, but there are a lot of little aspects to gamification that I learned about that I thought, if we put these in the right combination on a platform that is scalable and flexible, we could actually engage people at the very lowest level, taking a lesson, how to learn how to spot a sender email address or how to spot links in a message and things like that. So that was when I started to realize the real power of gamification. And so we built this platform, and it's been really successful. As you had a chance to try it out. I loved your testimonial, your quote for it. Thanks very much.
No problem.
But that's something that is just a piece of the entire security program that every CISO has to manage these days. And certainly, you hear, employees are the weakest link. Awareness training is hugely important. It is, but I like to help CISOs step back and say, what are all the aspects of the program that we need to focus on that are just being ignored right now?
Yeah. I think couple of things I want to pull out of what you said there. Going back to the start, the conference, right? So my experience at RSAC this year, whilst lots of it was informative, there were some amazing talks. I was very, apart from my free T-shirts, socks, and stickers that I got in the vendor hall, it was very driven by the recent buzzwords. From the CISOs I spoke to while I was there, it didn't look like it was actually addressing any problems they've got. It was more, as you said, you look at some of these enterprise firms, some of the CISOs that go in there and their existing technology stack and the amount of products they've got, especially not in the right place. I mean, you look at the matrix of the things that you need to cover, and they're all bunched together, 10% of one being used, 20% of another being used. And it's just absolutely crazy. I mean, especially with what we saw in the press today with the Uber CISO. I mean, it's not a job for everyone at the moment. I don't think.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw a tweet the other day that said, "Why are CISOs so stressed?" And I said, "You're kidding."
Yeah. Wait until the news today. Quickly before we dive back in, people who are watching, you'll notice we normally have the chat up on the right hand side. I haven't got that on today, but I am very aware of all of you in there. The reason we haven't got it on is because we're going to bring some slides up, and I don't want it to detract away from what you can see. But just a quick shout out to a few of you in there. I want to say a massive thank you to Ivan for tuning in. I know you've got the flu, so keep yourself wrapped up warm. Have a hot toddy, and I hope that you feel better soon. Gregor, Jan, Raven, Chimeria. There's just so many. Ashwin, I'm looking through all the names there. Bill Slater's in the house as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's your involvement and input that make these events so engaging and interesting. So although you can't see the chat, please do drop any comments or questions that you've got in there. And I think Scott will be keen to try and address those as we go through. But back to you then, Scott. So you've told me a bit about the history. You've told me
Yeah.
the why. Tell me the when. So when did it happen? And then the what? What does it do? Let's talk about it.
You mean Click Armor?
I do.
Yeah. So it happened. I actually, as a consultant, I saw this idea that we needed to kind of pursue. And so I did some prototyping early on when I was a consultant. I had a good year, so I put some money aside. I started doing some prototyping. I hired a student to do a few things and got some feedback on people. So that was around 2018. And then 2019, I actually got serious. We got some actually government funding to kick things off, hired a couple of people full time. And it sort of went from there. We have been commercial since about 2019. We're constantly improving the product. One of the things that we're learning also that's really interesting about the security awareness space within the security program is there really is not a lot of appetite for spending time managing training.
No.
They've got enough on their plate trying to understand what these phishing threats are and how to address them, in various different ways. But the actual logistics of managing a training program is painful. And so we've actually, over the last year or so, been very focused on automating things you can set and forget, like you set up a course to start at a certain time, or you set up a series of 3-minute challenges that would happen over a period of weeks. And then you can just let it go. And those things, notifications get sent to people, reports get sent out automatically. So it's really become a nice sort of hands-off thing that is valuable to everybody. So that's kind of how we've evolved over the last couple of years. We've been very partner-oriented with MSPs and managed security service providers as well. So those are things that, we know the small businesses tend to not have a lot of resources for doing security properly. So it's really important to be able to offer these to MSPs and MSSPs.
Oh, absolutely. And one quick thing, the thing I really liked about it, and we will go on to the human CISO bit in a bit, I promise. The bit I liked was the competitive edge of it. So the fact that
gamification.
there's a leaderboard, and being quite a competitive person. Although it also showed me, I mean, I'm no cybersecurity expert, and I never pretended to be, but I've been sort of hyper focused on studying the last couple of years, and I got quite a few of those wrong, Scott, if I'm honest.
Well, I hope it didn't
demotivate
you, right? So the people don't mind a challenge, right? If it's not a stupid challenge.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the key to it, right? Is you can make things challenging, but also keep people engaged. I know though that with awareness training, people are looking for any excuse to disengage that they can. So you can't be too cute with this stuff, right? I mean, we've had people suggest, well, maybe people should lose a life if they click on the wrong thing or get ransomware or something like that. And I'm going, that's not going to work, because as soon as that happens to them, they're going to feel very depressed and disengaged, right? So we make fun out of it. Oh, oops, you got ransomware. You don't get any points, but you get some feedback and you get to try again. So that's fine. So those are, a lot of the elements of the product that I think we're really proud of and happy that we're getting great traction and feedback on.
Absolutely, and it's all about the feedback, as we know, Scott, isn't it? And I think it's proving the point as to what you're doing is working. So we've got a quick question before we dig into the human CISO side. I'll bring it up on the screen. What MS degree program / school would you recommend to be a CISO? Thanks, Raven, for that.
The School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah. It's the best answer.
I mean, there are a lot of good cybersecurity programs being put together by various institutions. I know here in Canada, in Ontario, there's the Cybersecurity Catalyst. I think I can't remember the actual name of the thing now, but it's in Toronto, part
Okay.
of the Toronto Metropolitan University. They've got some great stuff. There's a lot of local colleges. There's a lot of universities that are starting to focus on being prepared to run a security program, but it's actually fairly recent. So I think you have to do some shopping around, look for testimonials from people
Yeah.
that have been through the program, and talk to CISOs who are in that position right now and say, what kind of education is needed? You see also a lot of people coming from different, it's always been the case in the security world, people come from different backgrounds, right?
Yeah.
I've known musicians and people in fine arts and psychology who became, very good security people. And so you don't have to have a deep technical knowledge or deep security training, but it's going to become more and more important to have that
I
as
mean,
it
you
becomes.
see comments like that are incendiary on LinkedIn, right? Because you get the really technical CISOs going, "You can't do the job unless you know, unless you know," and then you get the more business focused ones arguing the point. And I think the answer is it depends on what firm you're at for a start,
It
doesn't it?
does, and it
Let's be
depends on
honest.
your own personality, right? I
Yeah,
mean, if you're a very organized person, you can manage a lot of things without having a lot of technical knowledge. You can learn to delegate. You can hire the right people that you can trust, and those are things that you can, if you need to, within minutes, you can ask the right person, get the right answer that you need. So, in my view, you don't need to be super technical to be a CISO.
no. I think again, I suppose going off on a tangent a little bit, if you're in a software or technology focused organization, a CISO can become part of the sales team or a sales enabler as well. And we're seeing that more and more. So I think
Yeah.
that perhaps is that a BISO role more than a CISO role? There's a
It's emerging,
terminology
yeah,
I heard
yeah,
the other day.
yeah, the business information security officer, I think
Yeah.
it is, yeah, yeah. It's definitely something that I would encourage, people, some of the most successful CISOs I've encountered, and this was before, there were a lot of good academic programs for teaching security, but
Yeah.
this was 10 years ago at a B-Sides. I think I ran into somebody who had been very successful as a CISO, and they explained how they did it. And that was when they first joined or first were given the role, they would go to every meeting of a business unit that they could, just to listen, not to tell people what to do. He didn't know what to tell them. He
Yeah.
would just be there and listen. And he would listen and sometimes ask questions to understand better. But the more time he spent with them, the more they trusted him. They recognized him, that he wasn't trying to interfere, right? And then he could start to ask favors or, look for ways to say, you know what, it would really help the business if you guys could do something a little smarter, right, than what's being done
I
now.
think that relates to this point that Ivan's just come out with, that there's so many cybersecurity tools, trends, technologies, standards, risk types, requirements in big firms. A
Yeah.
CISO is more like a small department than a single role. And it's exactly what you've just said. I think one of the biggest skills that I see from CISOs is their ability to work with people who are experts at the bits that they're not, and they know and have a panel or a group of people that they trust, whether that's inside the company or outside the company. I think again we're back to the power of your network being your net worth, aren't we, a little bit?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think you're right. In a larger organization, it's a little bit easier to allocate some resources to have a representative in each department. But you don't have to have that kind of formality. You can have, we've heard a lot about the security champions program, and that we might actually do a whole segment
Yeah,
on that sometime, right? But to have a security champion, in my mind, doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the original formal definition was around AppSec or application
developers.
security.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But I see security champions as anyone who cares about the security of the organization or has an interest in security in general. Maybe they want a career in security or maybe they don't, but they're an ally and you need to leverage them. You need to keep them up to date on, what the program needs and get ideas from them on how things can be done in a way that doesn't impact people negatively. So you get a bit of feedback and dialogue from people like that.
I think as long as, I mean, staying with the security champions theme, especially around AppSec, I think there's a little bit of hesitancy around in some, I've got to be careful what I say here. In some organisations, it's just a bit. There's a job that we're not going to pay you for, son. You carry on and do that, and then we've ticked that box. And it's not every organisation. I'm not saying that, but I have seen that in
Yeah.
discussions I've had with firms where the security champions a cop out for not bringing someone on board to do the job properly.
Yeah, that's right. It's unfortunate, but yeah, in the context that I'm thinking of, it has to be a collaborative thing that, people get value out of for helping you. But there's a lot of power there from the people who aren't getting paid for that part of the job, but they're willing to help out.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, look, we've my fault. Gone off
No,
on a
it's all
tangent
great. It's
as
I
as
love
as usual. Shall I bring the
yeah, go
slide
ahead.
deck up, Scott, and
Yeah, you
have a
can
little
maybe
talk
move
through?
it on to slide 4, which is really talking about risks.
Here we go.
One of the
Here.
things I wanted to cover in this first session was really just at a high level the fact that CISOs are really dealing with a kind of risk that not everybody understands, especially in traditional organizations that have maybe more senior people in them. They've, come from maybe a business background or a technical background or an operational background, and they will know one or more of these other kinds of risks: strategic risks, financial risks,
Yeah,
project risks, health and safety, other kinds of compliance risks, perhaps, but they may not be as familiar with security risks or information security risks, especially. And so we have to really start thinking about, especially, I know Raymond mentioned communication skills, right? So we have to be speaking to people in a language they understand. And if it's new to them, we have to make sure they understand it. So if you go to the next slide.
can I stick on that for a
Yeah,
minute
yeah, yeah.
and play devil's advocate the other side?
Yes.
So when it comes to C-suite, especially finance directors and CEOs, the terminology around risk compared to the security terminology around risk is completely different.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I think there's that education process the other way as well, isn't there? For a CISOs or
Both
security
ways.
leaders.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I'll
Um,
move on. I knew I'd have to jump in and
No,
ruin
actually, you
it
don't
again.
have to move the slide just yet. I would like to. In fact, what you brought up was something I meant to
Oh,
speak
look at
about.
that. Seamless.
There we go. Yeah. So the fact that a financial risk has different elements. I don't even understand financial risk myself so that much. So in terms of what terminology they use, I do know project risks. There's schedule risks,
Yeah.
there's quality risks, and all those things. But when we are in a security role and you start to hear people talking about the kinds of risks that appear in those other domains, you've got to stop and ask a question and say, wait a minute, let's get on the same page what we mean by these things, and
Yeah.
so things like health and safety, they're similar. And I'll get to actually, I'll get you to move to the next slide just to sort of put this in a little bit more graphical context. And so, think of security risk. If you haven't seen this kind of model before, security risk on the left is a combination of really three things that are really proportional. And so as you increase one of these things, the risk goes up. So there's the impact on assets, whether it's, cash or information or systems. You're trying to reduce impact on those things by any outside actor or even inside actor.
Yeah.
On the right hand side, you've got the threat, which is a potential, usually an attacker, a person, but it could be an accidental incident. Natural hazards, things like that are also
Yeah.
threats. And each of those have a capability and a likelihood of happening. And so in the middle, there is what's there to prevent the threat from being successful, which is their vulnerability. And so the vulnerability and threats together kind of determine the likelihood that this asset value is going to get impacted.
Yeah.
And so it's a simple model for just deciding, what do we need to talk about? Well, we can't really change that much as CISOs. We can't change that much about the value of the assets we're protecting. That's our job. We've been given the job and we signed up for it. The threat level we can't really change. What we can change most of the time is our level of vulnerability. And so we need to keep these scenarios in mind. What are the threats? Every threat has a target that they're trying to get to. Every asset has a threat that is trying to act on it. And so you have to think of those pathways and what is in the way of the attacker being successful. So those are the safeguards, or call them controls or security measures. And whenever we put something in place, unfortunately, it's an inverse relationship. The stronger we make the control, the lower the vulnerability. So we have to just sort of invert the strength of our stuff to understand how that impacts risk. So the stronger our controls, the less risk, because we're reducing vulnerability. That's the model that I wanted to just put forward. And then if you go to the next slide, I break it down a little bit more by identifying the human parts of this model. And on the left, of course, we've got our information and systems. We're trying to protect and lower the impact. And then on the right-hand side, we've got technical threats and human threats. So the technical threats, things like malware that are constantly spreading around and maybe uncontrolled or in the wild, they come in through different technical entry points, firewalls, etc. But we then have the human threat, which is either the person sending a phishing email, the person who's running the technical attack tools, or maybe even a social engineer, right, who's trying to literally get humans to
those emotion driven, I suppose. Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's the human part of this vulnerability equation or component that we're really trying to focus on when we talk about strengthening our security program. If you go to the next slide, we can start to look a little more deeply at what this means to a CISO, right? And so you might actually recognize, some of the elements here, like governance processes, and this is, C-suite and board level players, right?
Yeah.
Stakeholders, and their real role is to determine what they're going to invest in. And so over time, occasionally they will sit down and decide, okay, we got this much money, this many resources. What are we going to spend them on? And we know we're never going to get to zero risk. That's an
That'd be
unrealistic thing.
nice.
We're
Yeah.
never going to have enough money to get to zero risk. So we've got to allocate the money we have to the people, investing in things like training, screening people, and putting particular processes in place, as well as technologies. Now, we've talked earlier about the fact that a lot of technology is in place already or has been purchased, not necessarily in place, right? There's a big difference between buying technology and deploying it,
Very
it
much.
turns
Yeah.
out. And configuring it, right? And that goes to the people as well. So my point here is that each of these things, people, processes, and technologies, are interdependent. So the people are affected by the processes as well as the technology. So think
Yeah.
about how well people respond to adding multi-factor authentication to your your systems, right? So there's a response.
Especially at the C-suite level. Yeah.
Yeah. And similarly, your policies and processes are going to be dependent on the technologies that you can use to enable them or put them in place, as well as the people. So there are these interdependencies, but the end result is you get some outcome. You get impacts from the interdependencies of these things working on each other, and you get some level of vulnerability, call it at the corporate level. Instead of looking at every different use case or risk scenario, we're going to abstract it to a high level and say, in general, we've got this level of vulnerability based on our different security investments. And then that will feed back into the front end again to the governance process and say, okay, now we have a risk environment where we've got some safeguards or controls in place, but we also still have some residual risk that we have to deal with. And then we also have compliance risks and all the other kinds of risks that we talked about a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And so the risk has to kind of include and incorporate a really clear perspective on how it's going to impact the people, processes, and technologies as we iterate around this circle, right? And so it involves having the right set of language, interpretation, and understanding of what the impacts are of each of these things that we're investing in. And so right now, many organizations, when we said we're overspent on technology, it means that the people side is going to be weaker. It's going to have less useful leverage of the technology in a lot of cases. And so we still have a lot of work to do on that risk ultimately.
Absolutely. So shall
Any
we?
questions there on that, either from you, Simon, or from folks in the
I
chat?
think I think I think for me, I'm clear on it. I mean, my background was 25 years in financial services,
Oh yeah,
dealing with money based risk. So I used to spend a lot of my time helping clients quantify their risk tolerance and
yeah.
also quantify their, more importantly and equally relevant to this industry, their capacity for loss or their acceptance of
Hmm.
risk, which is, I suppose, something that isn't talked about as much as all the defensive measures and other things that you can put in place, for the simple reason that there isn't anything you can buy that solves that problem. But risk acceptance for me is going to form more and more of a part of a CISO's role, I think, moving forward, especially with the turmoil we've got in the insurance market at the moment. And I would call it turmoil, with Lloyd's pulling, any
Yeah.
coverage on state-sponsored attacks a while back. And I think I saw in the news today that Lloyd's syndicate are investigating a cyber attack as well at the moment. So
Wow. Yeah.
it's interesting time. So no, I
Yeah.
think you've explained that really, really well, Scott. Thank you.
So actually, and I think the comment from Raven is the budgeting side of things is interesting, and you can never really get to 100% secure. But the way I look at risk, it's not like you're going to have some absolute quantity of risk that you have to address. It's really more of a prioritization. Where is my next security dollar that's available going to have to be spent, right? And that's how it's more useful than just trying to say, here, I have this risk. It's really going to be used as, where do I have to start investing more next?
I was muted then while I was typing, so you didn't hear me clickety clacking in the chat. So, thank you, Scott. That's brilliant. Do you want me to move on to the next slide?
Yeah, let's move on, and then we'll sort of go into a little bit more of a discussion of compliance, because this is a
Brilliant.
common issue, within businesses, especially when you've got limited resources. You say, well, let's just do what we need to do for compliance, right? And what I'm going to argue here is you really should think about more than just compliance. So understanding that compliance is really intended to be what I call the low bar for managing risks. It's the table stakes, and whatever regulatory regime is in place can't dictate to you exactly how you do everything in your business. But they can say, you know what, we think it would be less risky if you did this and this and this, and we can come and audit you and make sure that you're doing those things, and we'll have a better feeling. But that doesn't necessarily give you a return on investment, right? It's
No.
it's a cost to be in the game, really. So the next layer that I think actually does pay off is when you start thinking about the risks and the things that you're investing in anyway. I'm going to have to do some kind of identity management. I'm going to have to do some kind of training. Why don't I do a good job of it, right? I should make sure that it's being done with a good quality product, or a well thought out process, and a well designed set of configurations, for example, right? So we want to be more than just putting a firewall in there and saying, deny all, and oh yeah, we have to change the passwords. Yeah, okay, now we're good.
Instead of being a BPU, a business prevention unit, as they're
Yes,
sometimes called, the compliance
yeah,
department.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that the more you spend on understanding the risks and putting those safeguards in place that mean something to you, your business better than anyone else. What are the things you could be adding on top of the compliance that you're already spending on to really manage the risks in a better way? And that will reduce your bottom line, right? Sorry, improve your bottom line.
Yeah.
It'll reduce the costs and improve your bottom line. So what it really ends up doing is if you have a risk management culture, which means everybody in the organization is considering risk and considering security whenever they're making important decisions, right? Then you actually start to have an unfair advantage over the folks that are just doing the bare minimum for compliance, because they are not going to be in a good position, as we said, or in a defensible position if they have a breach. Nobody's saying that you're not going to have a breach if
No.
you spend some extra money on risk and culture, but it will actually help you in court to say, you know what, we went beyond the compliance requirements,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
we
And having those robust processes and controls in place means that when a breach does happen, you know what to do. I think that's
yeah,
the key
yeah.
thing, isn't it? And I don't believe for 1 minute that all the enterprise organizations out there have a robust policy and process in place for that, because you see them flapping around, not reporting anything for 3 days, and then throwing everything up in the air.
Yeah, there's some really interesting stories that we see, right? But
Yeah.
so we're going to dig into some of these risk areas a lot more in the future. But I think at a high level, it's really just important for us to have the terminology, to have the basic concepts of balancing people, processes, and technology, and the difference between risk and compliance, and whether we should be just doing what's necessary or whether we should be digging in and trying to understand the risks better.
Absolutely. I read a brief article today on LinkedIn, and I always talk about, and it always comes up in conversation, how it's important for CISOs and security leaders to understand the language of the C-suite. I think it is, but I think there's some responsibility from the C-suite in these businesses to start to understand security and technology as well, because the world we live in now, you know, cyber or security is going to be an inherent key part of any business. So to
Yeah.
be a business leader and not have some form of understanding of that, I think I might have just talked up a new idea for another business there, where we could be educating leaders on security rather than the other way around, perhaps. It's probably already been done, I'm sure, Scott.
Well, yeah, it's definitely an area for opportunity.
Yeah.
It hasn't been completely solved, that's for sure.
No, absolutely not. Next slide.
Yeah, let's go on.
Let's go. Don't forget, everyone who's watching, I haven't got the chat up on the screen because I don't want to impede on the slides that we're going through today. But if you do have any questions, please do drop them in the chat. I am keeping an eye on it all the time. And thank you all for tuning in. Sorry, Scott, carry on.
Yeah, no worries. And I think we're getting close to the end right now. I'd love to keep it open for Q&A and just broader discussion for a few minutes towards the end. But this is just sort of wrapping things up. What can we do to start to engage executives around the security priorities, right? And number one is, as we said, ensure that executives on the board know basic security
Oh, look, I
principles and
didn't even know that was
technology.
coming up. How about
There
that,
you go.
Simon?
Right. We work well together, Simon.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really pleased with that.
So, what are the impacts? What are the threats, the vulnerabilities, controls, assurances, breach? There's tons of terms. We don't need to go in a great detail, but the risk terminology is really important for them to understand, because especially if it is different or conflicts or contrasts with the risk area that they already knew before, right? And so whether it's financial risk or whatever, you have to understand the subtle differences in
Yeah.
many cases. So that's the first step. Make sure you are all speaking the same language, or you can convey the important security risk issues to the board. And if they don't understand, you got to teach them, right? And
Yes, it's our or leaders' responsibility, I would say, to make sure that they do understand, and that is sometimes a thankless task, I would say.
yeah. I mean, any board member who's been hacked or received an
Well,
SMS
that they're
message
on
saying
side.
that
Yeah.
they're on side, yeah, and soon that'll be all of them. But
Yeah.
we can't wait for that to happen,
No,
right?
absolutely.
So the other aspect is to consider compliance to be a subset of the risk environment, right? You might have some compliance risk for not achieving your compliance goals, but you may have bigger risks from just some human aspects of things that we're going to talk about later that you should be aware of. I would say look for what I call the invisible ROI in managing those risks,
I love
which
that.
means we can reduce costs almost predictably, right? I mean, when you think about on a macro level, you've probably heard that the stats, right? That $6 trillion in global cybercrime, right?
Yeah.
Whatever 2021, and that I looked it up, and the total global budget for IT spending for enterprises, and do you any idea what that was for the
It's
same year?
nowhere near that. Nowhere
4
near that,
trillion.
is it?
4
Go on.
trillion.
4.
Two-thirds.
Yeah. There we
So it
go.
was more profitable to be a hacker than to be running an enterprise IT
I,
infrastructure.
I
Anyway,
can see that remaining the same for a considerable amount of time, I
yeah,
think, Scott,
yeah.
at the moment.
And so, the other aspect is then you say, okay, well, what's happening with, all the security breaches? Well, 85 to 90% of all security breaches involve people falling for phishing or social
Yeah.
engineering attacks at some point during the kill chain or the threat life cycle, right? And so that means that people are just not able to handle those decisions. And technology is not going to solve the problem anytime soon, right? As
No.
much as I know lots of security colleagues, professionals who say, well, the user shouldn't have to worry about whether they should be able to click on a link or not. We should just figure it out for them. Yeah, we're waiting for that day to come, but it's not it's not going to be here anytime soon. So we still have to do that or educate them on that. And so all that to say, security awareness itself is really important now. And if you can reduce the amount of the number of bad decisions being made by employees by just a little bit. Think of all the all the savings, on a ransomware attack or anything like that on a micro level. You can extrapolate a bit.
It's massive as well, isn't it? I mean, do you mind if we just focus on quickly the importance of relevant training as well? Because
Absolutely, yeah,
I
yeah,
think there seems to be a bit of a broad brush approach in some places for cyber awareness training where everyone gets the same training, and
yeah,
you could argue that I don't know if it was you or someone else who used this analogy the other day. It might have been another CISO I was speaking to. He was using a mechanic as an example of the training that they would need. You know, that the threats that they come across would be updating the systems in the car. They tend to get their updates on USB flash drives for these
yes, yeah,
systems, even still now. You
yep,
know, for the readers that they've got that do the services and the checks on the vehicles, and it's a different type of training for that guy than it is
yep,
for someone who sits behind a desk all
yeah.
day, isn't it?
It's all in the context, right?
Yeah,
And that is something that we're focusing on with Click Armor. I don't want to pitch it too much, but basically the idea is that people understand in a context, and to give them context, you really kind of have to give them a scenario. You have to say,
yeah,
here's a situation you're in, and so somebody has done this or said this, and what are you going to do in response, or what are you going to do to explore the situation a bit more and get the information you need to make a good decision. And that's something that we really focus on a lot. And we're starting with the low hanging fruit, right? The general training that
yeah,
everybody can consume. But what you're talking about there, is as a mechanic is, role based training for
absolutely.
security awareness. Now,
Yeah,
if you look at a controls or a cybersecurity infrastructure or control standards such as NIST
yeah,
853, right? You got 900 controls there. 3 or 4 of them are about awareness and training, right?
yeah,
And so the number one control there is you must have a policy for security awareness. Number 2 is everybody must be trained on security awareness. Number 3 is it has to be done regularly and you have to track it. And then number 4, I think, is you must train people with security requirements that meet their needs of their job. And that's the last one.
yeah. The most
We're a
important
long
one.
way from addressing all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next slide.
Just let me see. Yeah, I think really it's a matter of
Oh, just
looking at.
touch on number 5 because I don't think we've talked about that, Scott. Actually,
Yeah,
and
I think it's really thinking about not just the phishing and social engineering attacks, that a board needs to be concerned about. It's things like if anybody here is in Canada, you'll remember back in July, we had a major telco. Their mobile network went down for 2 days.
yeah,
Rogers,
I
uh,
read
and
that.
and so imagine, what it, what actually happened there was that their border gateway protocol routers were updated the wrong way, and so they lost all the routing information,
Oh my goodness.
and nobody could recover it for 2 days. Right? That was a human error. Right? That was a human risk that we actually, probably could have reduced the risk of happening. It hasn't. I don't think it's ever happened to another telco that I know of. But those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. It's not just the direct attacks. There's a lot of accidental exposure of data. There's a lot of accidental outages that we could actually be talking to the board level executives about and putting those risks in context in addition to the direct cyber attacks.
Absolutely. I think while we're on the non-technical security risks, I mean, look at the global landscape at the moment with regard, I suppose I'll be brutally to the point with it. What's going on in Russia with Ukraine at the moment? I think those physical security controls for national infrastructure in particular have suddenly come into the limelight with a very sharp focus over here. And
Mhm.
I think we've been caught with our pants down a little bit with with regards to how ill prepared we are. Excuse me. Should anything happen, I mean, you've got a couple of examples. One would be the cable that runs under the Atlantic from the Irish Sea over to the
Yes.
States that carries, I don't know how much information and financial data every second. You've then got the gas pipelines nearby. And I think in Paris, maybe last year, there were a threat actor, basically through obtaining publicly available information, disconnected a whole suburb of Paris's internet connection through chopping through a cable. And it just goes to show, the
Yeah.
risks are everywhere, and not all of them are technical.
Yeah, for sure. There are a lot of areas where we, as a business, need to be thinking, beyond just the technology and the obvious things, right?
Yeah.
It's a great question by Raven about, besides phishing and basic security training, what other security training would you like to train end users on? Well, I'm going to ask Simon if he actually has a guess at what my answer might be for that one.
What other security training would you like to train end users on? I haven't got a guess because I don't want to look stupid. And it's 10:45 and
Well,
it's been a long day.
for 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 me, I'm gonna say two possible answers, right? So if you really want me to be serious and take the literal words in the question,
Yeah.
it's sounding like, okay, so if I had to train somebody on something and it wasn't basic phishing and security awareness, what would it be? I think I would start talking about data brokers and the fact that people just generally don't think that they're a target, and how much information attackers know about them and can leverage in ways that they've not imagined, right? So there are a lot of things we could teach people there.
I think that the biggest problem is the fact that the whole world shares their life on social media with no thought to security
It's a huge
whatsoever.
problem. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
huge problem.
and I can't see that changing. And the irony of it, on LinkedIn, I actually see on a regular basis a couple of, and they're not in Canada or the US, so I can say this because I think most of our audience are from there, in the UK, who regularly post pictures of their young children on
Yeah,
LinkedIn.
yeah,
And sharenting, I think they call it, is the new terminology. I mean, I've got 6 children. Even before I was in cybersecurity, I was that awkward person who didn't have a Facebook account because I didn't want my data thrown around everywhere. And
yeah,
it seems like I feel like I'm vindicated now in my approach from
yeah,
before. And the
yeah.
the, bat, the, bat, the battle I have, Scott, is with my teenage children, especially on TikTok, which is obviously a Chinese data gathering site,
Yes,
really.
yeah, yeah.
Trying to explain that to them, and the answer is, well, what are they going to take from me, Dad? I haven't got anything they want. What do you say to that? Can you help me with an answer? They've got
That is
access to
it.
my bank card, son. That's what they've got. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an answer for that explicitly right now. So, I mean, it is a problem that everybody has to kind of figure out how they're going to talk to their kids
But I
about.
think, I mean, the long-winded answer was kind of going back to what you said about making sure people are actually aware
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the threats out there and what's
But my
important.
real answer to that question, to Ray-Ben's question, might sound flippant, but I'm absolutely serious. And that is, I don't need to teach them about anything else other than phishing and basic security awareness because there's so much need for it.
Yeah, very much so. Good answer. I think you've you've gone. Where have you gone, Scott? Don't
Am I
run
back?
out on me. Don't run out on me like that and leave me
I'm still
hanging.
here. I'm still here. I'm still
Where
here.
did you go?
I don't know. My internet went down for a while. It's just
It's
as we
normally
talked about.
me. It's normally me. You're under a DDoS attack at the moment. Do you want me to move on to the next one, Scott?
Yeah, sure. That's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
Excellent.
was just wanting to wrap up and say, what did people find most interesting or useful in this session?
I think we've got a question in the audience from William, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But
Yeah.
for me, I think the most important part of this is the part around risk and the terminology of risk, because there seems to be this misconception that the C-suite and the security leaders both understand the terminology that's going on. And I think for me, the biggest draw from this today has been the need for us to focus on the
Hmm.
clarity around what risks actually mean, especially in the context of cybersecurity, and also the differences in financial risks as well. But William said, how do you explain residual risk gracefully? Where is it? I'll get rid of us, to the CEO and board of directors. Good one, William.
That is a good question. Wow. Well, first of all, you have to make sure they understand what the basic risks are, right? And or the basic definition of the risk, as we talked about earlier. But the basic thing is you can say, we don't have enough money to reduce all our risk to zero, right? So there's always going to be some residual risk. There's something that we have to accept the risk of. And
Yeah.
if we have a limited amount of budget, we have to decide which things we're going to let go and which things we're going to spend money on. I don't know if that
Yeah,
answers the
absolutely.
question.
And which things you can are acceptable as well, I suppose, or may
Well,
have to
yeah,
be
I mean,
acceptable.
it's not so much what is acceptable. It's just that, well, I guess, yeah, you're right. There is a certain what would be called risk tolerance, right? In many risk management
Yeah.
frameworks, you say here's the acceptable level of risk, and things that are below that, I'm not even going to think about, right? But most organizations have so many things above that level of acceptable risk that they're almost never going to get down to the level of acceptable risk, let alone no risk. So that's, when you're doing in the government, they do what they call authorization to operate or authority to operate
Yeah.
when they certify a system is ready to go live. And there's always conditions on those things saying, yeah, we're going to let it go live, even though there's this thing that is not really secured the way it should be. I'm going to accept that risk. And so that's, there's a little bit of a deeper discussion that you would have to do with the board on residual risk around making sure they understand that there is a certain amount of stuff that you can accept. And then there are certain things that you don't want to accept, but you can't afford to resolve yet.
No, absolutely. Let me just, if that's the last slide, I'm going to take that off, if that's okay, and bring us back up
Yeah, for sure. Let's open it
on
up and
on the screen, because I see that Raymond's got a question there as well. So Raymond has said, how much is acceptable risk, and how? Oh, he's gone. And how close should that be to zero? You're just trying to make me nervous, aren't you? Because I don't know the answer to that question.
how much is acceptable risk? That is a totally organization dependent question, right?
Yeah.
So you really have to look at the way you do a risk tolerance analysis is it starts with a threat assessment, right? You have to say, what are all the things that could happen to our business? You can do a business impact assessment and say, here are all our critical processes that have to be in place for us to operate to meet our mandate. And what are the things that could impact those business processes that would cause us to not be able to operate? And so when you
Yeah.
get to that level, you're going to say, okay, we can be out of service for a period of time. We can afford to have so much in terms of unexpected expenses related to
Yeah.
cyber attacks, etc. So there is, a whole discipline around running workshops for determining your acceptable level of risk in an enterprise. For smaller businesses, you don't often get an acceptable risk statement. It's really just, I'm going to do what I can afford to. But we know we're never going to get even to an acceptable level of risk against phishing or social engineering. That's just not
Yeah.
going to happen.
But then, I'll do the plug for you. With an affordable training platform, surely you can.
Absolutely. And I heard somebody today say that our content blew some other competitors out of the water. So
That was me, I
I don't
think.
know. Oh, was that you? Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
It was me. Yeah, it was me. I mean, I've played around in a few different systems, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to get in trouble. But I've used some fairly market leading ones, and I've got to be honest, I haven't been terribly engaged or impressed with them. And I would recommend for anyone. I've got a little caption here actually. If you do get a chance to check it out, check out ClickArmor's website here and have a look at
Yeah,
their
I'll give you
training,
another
especially
little
if
tip
you're.
for the people on the call. We actually have a Security Awareness Month special right now for if you go to clickarmor.ca/quick start, all one
Oh,
word. It's $499 for 1,000 people for 6 weeks, and you get
wow!
the phishing course and 4 3-minute weekly phishing challenges. So it's a
Look at that,
really,
seamless.
oh man, you are good. You
I
are
know.
so good.
I'm getting good. I'm getting good at this typing, Lark. I tell you.
Yeah. So
That sounds like a good deal.
it's a pretty good deal. It's almost nothing, to most organizations. And as I mentioned before, there's so much automation in what we do that once you set it up, you don't need a lot of resources to manage it. But you get
No,
great
which
engagement
is
with.
one of the best things about it, I think. You keep doing this. You keep doing this to me, Scott. You keep going and then coming back. It's
I
like
don't know
I'm on
what's
a.
going
It's
on.
like
I'm on
I'm
fiber.
on a date, and you're leaving me sitting at the table with my
I have
coffee.
fiber to the house. I've got my my network cable plugged into the router. I don't know what else more I
I
could be
said this
doing.
earlier, it's normally me. I mean, we live in a very rural location and I rely on Starlink, which works pretty well most of the time. But because we've got a thatched roof on our property, I can't put the dish on the roof.
Oh
So
yeah.
the problem is every time we have a farm vehicle drive past, which happens during the day, I lose reception for about 3 seconds. Which
Maybe that's what it is. I'll have to go outside and look for a
it could be.
tractor.
You're gonna have a look. Well, look, we're pretty much out of time. But before we wrap things up, this is the first of a few sessions we're going to do. I mean, we've put it down as 4. It might end up being more than that, depending on,
Yeah.
how
Depending
much
on
we
how much
cover.
people like it, happy
Well,
to
I
do.
mean, the chat engagement today has been phenomenal. I want to say thank you to everyone who's jumped in. It's been
Yeah,
absolutely
thanks very much.
amazing, as per usual. It makes such a difference when people jump in and ask questions. It really does. But could we just give a quick overview on what you're going to cover on the next sessions before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think we're going to go into things like security culture, which is something that I've talked to a lot of CISOs about recently, and they are really of the opinion that if you can, at a high level, understand, assess your culture, and put a plan together and to improve it, it's more than just training. And so that's one of the things that we're going to talk about in the future. And we'll certainly go into more details on awareness training, different topics and assessments and things like that.
Do you think we can even dig in and have a quick look at the platform as well, couldn't we, if I ask
Oh
nice?
yeah, if you bribe me, I might.
I'll bribe you. Yeah, I think that'll be really good. Look, Scott, it's been absolutely amazing. I just want to say a couple of things quickly. So, packed content coming next week. Same time, same place for second episode of the Human CISO with myself and Scott. I believe it's Monday. The CISO experience is back for series 2, and we have Christian Espinosa, best-selling author and all-round Iron Man, pretty amazing guy, coming on the show. I've had him on a couple of times before. If you haven't caught him, make sure you tune in. And then I think it's Tuesday or it might be Monday. You'll have to check out the YouTube page. We've got a how to hire in cybersecurity with the phenomenal Greg Vandergast, who's a CISO over here in the UK. And I believe there's another couple of events later in the week. But like I said, it's 11 o'clock at night here. Can't actually remember what they are, but please do check out the YouTube channel. And again, for all of you who've liked and subscribed, thank you so much. And for those that haven't, make sure you click that subscription button and ring that bell to be notified of future content. So, Scott, thank you so much. Everyone
Well, it's
else, we'll see you very soon.
been a pleasure. Look forward to talking to you guys again.
Thank you very much. See you all later.